Hello student, this is Shurprakash and today you will study here 6th lesson of your book, that is Beehive, and the name of the lesson is My Childhood. Students, this chapter has been extracted from an well-known autobiography, that is Wings of Fire, and you know very well about the autobiography that it is the autobiography of our former President Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. So, in this lesson, he tells us about his childhood, how he spent his childhood, and how he became the first citizen of India. He is also known as Missile Man. So, we will study here, read the passages, and later on I will explain you it. I was born into a middle class Tamil family in the island town of Rameswaram in the erstwhile Madras state. My father, Jainuluddin, had neither much formal education nor much wealth. Despite these disadvantages, he possessed great innate wisdom and a true generosity of spirit. He had an ideal helpmate in my mother, Ashima. I do not recall the exact number of people she fed every day, but I am quite certain that far more outsiders ate with us than all the members of her own family put together. So, here it is the introduction part of his life and his family members, that he belonged to a middle class Tamil family. He was not from well renowned family that he had a lot of money, but he belonged to a family which is called middle class family. And name of his father Jainuluddin, and his mother's name is Ashima. Both were very simple and sober, and they had limited possessions in spite of all these disadvantages. He had innate, that is, generosity for human beings, and that is why his mother Ashima always fed people more than that of his family. I was one of many children, a short boy with a rather undistinguished look, born to tall and handsome parents. We lived in our ancestral house, which was built in the middle of the 19th century. It was fairly large Pakka house made of limestone and brick on the Mosque Street in Rameswaram. My austere father used to avoid all essential comforts and luxuries. However, all necessities were provided for in terms of food, medicine, or clothes. In fact, I would say mine was a very secure childhood, both materially and emotionally. So, in this second paragraph, he tells us about his childhood, that is his life, that he how he looked like in his childhood. He was a short boy, and his looks were not as you think that he was very smart. So it was not so, but his parents were tall and handsome. In spite of that, he was an average looking child. So, where he lived in his ancestral house, and it had all the necessities that you can say in terms of food and medicine and clothes and education also, but there were not much luxuries. You can say luxuries like cozy beds or other things were not available in his house, but All the basic necessities were there, and his house was situated in Mosque Street. And he was very much cared by his parents, materially and emotionally. He was given proper education. In the third paragraph, we will see the Second World War broke out in 1939 when I was 8 years old. For reasons I have never been able to understand, a sudden demand for tamarind seeds erupted in the market. I used to collect the seeds and sell them to a provision shop on Moscow Street. A day's collection would fetch me the princely sum of 1 anna. My brother-in-law Jalaluddin would tell me stories about the war, which I would later attempt to trace in the headlines in Dinamani. Our area, being isolated, was completely unaffected by war, but soon India was forced to join the elite forces, and something like a state of emergency was declared. The first casualty came in the form of the suspension of the train halt at Rameshwaram station. The newspapers now had to be bundled and thrown out from the moving train on the Rameshwaram road between Rameshwaram and Dhanushkodi. That forced my cousin Samsuddin, who distributed newspaper in Rameshwaram, to look for a helping hand to catch the bundles, and as if naturally I felt the slot, Samsuddin helped me earn my first wages. Half a century later, I can still feel the surge of pride in earning my own money for the first time. So, in this paragraph, he tells us about an incident of his life, that it was about the Second World War, and it broke in 1939, and at that time India was under British rule, and for the reason India had to join elite forces, that to British, in the war. So at that time he used to collect tamarind seed for the sum of 1 anna, and his brother told the stories about the war, and later he read these stories of war in Dinamani, which was famous newspaper at that time. You know very well that where he lived, that is Rameshwaram, is the furthest point of the India, and it was unaffected from the war. But when Indian forces joined the elite countries, so an emergency was declared in the country, because whenever world war or any civil war occurs, then emergency is declared. Then in India, emergency was declared at that time, and how he knew about the emergency? The suspension of the train which stopped at Rameshwaram station, but after that, after emergency, the train which stopped at Rameshwaram, at that time Rameshwaram was not a big station, it was only a halt. So the train suspended to stop from there, and the newspaper which came there in that area from that train only, the newspaper then after were thrown from the trains. His cousin Samsuddin was newspaper seller, and he needed a helping hand. So Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, who was a child at that time, filled that space, and he helped Samsuddin. who was his cousin, in distributing newspaper and collecting newspaper, also collecting and distributing. Okay. So that is how he earned his first wages. Now, the fourth passage. Every child is born with some inherited characteristics into a specific socio-economic and emotional environment and trained in certain ways by figures of authority. I inherited honesty and self-discipline from my father. From my mother, I inherited faith in goodness and deep kindness, and so did my three brothers and sisters. I had three close friends in my childhood: Ramanath Shastri, Arvindan, and Shuprakasan. All these boys were from orthodox Hindu Brahmin families. As children, none of us ever felt any difference amongst ourselves because of our religious differences and upbringings. In fact, Ramanath Shastri was the son of Pakshi Lachman Shastri, the high priest of the Rameshwaram temple. Later, he took over the priesthood of the Rameshwaram temple from his father. Arvindan went into the business of arranging transport for visiting pilgrims, and Suprakasan became a catering contractor for the Southern Railway. So here he tells us more about his childhood, that how what he inherited from his parents, that is from his father: honesty and self discipline, that is very much important in one's life, and that he inherited from his father. And goodness and kindness, that is also important, because if we are human, then humanity should be our nature, and that he inherited from his mother. And his brothers and sister also inherited the same characteristics from their parents. He tells more about his childhood, that he had three friends in his childhood: Ramanath Shastri, Arvindan, and Shuprakasan. So all the boys who were his friends belonged to Hindu Brahmin families, and you can say that Hindu and Brahman, Hindu Brahman and Muslims can never be friends if there is any evil in someone's mind, but they had unity and amiability in their hearts, so they were true friends. So Ramanath Shastri belonged to orthodox Hindu family, and his father was the high priest of Rameshwaram temple, and later on Ramanath Shastri, who was his friend, became the priest of Rameshwaram temple. And the second friend, that is Arvindan, he settled his business of transport, and that was for visiting pilgrims. And the third friend, Suprakasan, who became a catering contractor for the Southern Railway, and that is how he told us about more about his childhood. During the annual Sri Sitaram Kalyanam ceremony, our family used to arrange boats with a special platform for carrying idols of the Lord from the temple to the marriage site, situated in the middle of the pond called Ramtirth, which was near our house. Events from the Ramayana and from the life of the prophet were the bedtime stories my mother and grandmother would tell the children in our family. So, in this passage, he tells us about the religious tolerance, that how they were mingled. We live together, and thus we are mingled, because we never think that our society is different from any aspect, that Hindu or Muslim. So he represents here the perfect example of religious tolerance. So while it was a ceremony of Sri Sita Ram Kalyanam, as you know, that marriage ceremony is celebrated of Sita and Ram. So at that time, his family, who was Muslim, and they carried the idols of Lord Ram from temple to marriage site. And where was the marriage site? It was in between the pond, that is Ram Tirth. And the stories which his mother and grandmother told him, they were belong to Ramayana or the stories of prophet. So it is a perfect example of religious tolerance. Religion was not a matter of humanity for him. One day, when I was in the 5th standard at the Rameshwaram Elementary School, a new teacher came to our class. I used to wear a cap which marked me as a Muslim, and I always sat in the front row next to Ramana Sastri, who wore the sacred thread. The new teacher could not stomach a Hindu priest's son sitting with a Muslim boy. In accordance with our social ranking, as the new teacher saw it, I was asked to go and sit on the back bench. I felt very sad, and so did Ramana Sastri. He looked utterly downcast as I shifted to my seat in the last row. The image of him weeping when I shifted to the last row left a lasting impression on me. So, here also a perfect example of religious tolerance, that evils never lie in any child's heart. So, who are the people who sow the seed of evil in our mind and heart? That the elder people. And that is what the teacher who came to Rameshwaram Elementary School did. He tells us about such a teacher who did so, and who said that Hindus are different from Muslim. But later on, he taught a lesson. Dr. Kalam always used to wear a cap, which is significant of a Muslim religion, and a sacred thread that is called Janeu is always worn by Ramana Sastri. They always sat together, and the new teacher could not digest it, that a Hindu family boy can sit with a Muslim family boy. So he asked Dr. Kalam to sit at the back of the class, and this made both the boys very sad. After school, we went home and told our respective parents about the incident. Lakshman Shastri summoned the teacher, and in our presence told the teacher that he should not spread the poison of social inequality and communal intolerance in the minds of innocent children. He bluntly asked the teacher to either apologize or quit the school and the island. Not only did the teacher regret his behavior, but the strong sense of conviction Lakshman Shastri conveyed ultimately reformed this young teacher. So, both the students, both the boys, complained about the incidents which occurred in his class to their respective families. And Lakshman Shastri who was the priest of temple, main priest of the temple. He summoned the teacher, he called the teacher, and asked, that is, he scolded the teacher, and asked to apologize the students. And he said, you have option, either you quit the school and island or apologize the students. So he learnt a lesson that he should not have sown the seed of evil in the hearts of the students, and that is how he learnt a lesson. On the whole, the small society of Rameshwaram was very rigid in terms of the segregation of different social groups. However, my science teacher Siva Subramania Iyer, though an orthodox Brahmin with a very conservative wife, was something of a rebel. He did his best to break social barriers so that people from varying backgrounds could mingle easily. He used to spend hours with me and would say, Kalam, I want you to develop so that you are on par with the highly educated people of the big cities. Dr. Kalam says here about the society that at that time society was very much oppressive, conservative. So in between, he tells us about his science teacher Siva Subramania Iyer. Though he was a Brahmin, but he had tolerance about the society, and moreover his wife was conservative, that she could not bear that any Muslim child would sit in his house. So he was also very much tolerant, and he says about the teacher that he would spend hours and encouraged him to study more so that he could be one of the renounced people in the big cities. One day he invited me to his home for a meal. His wife was horrified at the idea of a Muslim boy being invited to dine in her ritual pure kitchen. She refused to serve me in her kitchen. Siva Subramania Iyer was not perturbed, nor did he get angry with his wife, but instead served me with his own hands and sat down beside me to eat his meal. His wife watched us from behind the kitchen door. I wondered whether she had observed any difference in the way I ate rice, drank water, or cleaned the floor after the meal. When I was leaving his house, Siva Subramania Iyer invited me to join him for dinner again the next weekend. Observing my hesitation, he told me not to get upset, saying, once you decide to change the system, such problems have to be confronted. When I visited his house the next week, Siva Subramania Iyer's wife took me inside her kitchen and served me food with her own hands. So, this is a perfect example of changing the society. That how his science teacher Siva Subramania Iyer invited to his home, Kalam to his home, and though his wife annotated in that idea that any Muslim boy should not come in her ritual kitchen, but he served with his hands to Kalam. And after that, he invited again that and said that if you want a change, then you should be the change first, and you should face the society. Whatever the society says to you, you have to face and absorb it, and try to change the society. And that's what he did with his wife. He convinced his wife that there is no difference in our child and a Muslim boy's child. So she was convinced, and later on she served food with her own hand. Then the Second World War was over and India's freedom was imminent. Indians will build their own India, declared Gandhiji. The whole country was filled with an unprecedented optimism. I asked my father for permission to leave Rameswaram and study at the district headquarters in Ramanathapuram. So here he tells about the completion of World War, that it was over and India would become soon independent. That was declared by Gandhiji, and Indians became with a kind of hope that they would be an independent country. So he also asked for permission to leave his home and to study for higher education in Rameswaram headquarters, that is Ramanathapuram. He told me as if thinking aloud, Abdul, I know you have to go to grow. Does the seagull not fly across the sun alone and without a nest? He quoted Khalil Gibran to my hesitant mother. Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you but not from you. You may give them your love but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. So, in this last passage, Abdul Kalam's father convinced his mother that he has to leave. He tells that does the seagull not fly across the sun alone and without a nest? That he has to keep a long distance to travel. And after that, there is a poem that Your Children of Khalil Gibran. So this quote is given by Khalil Gibran in his poetry Your Children, that your children are not your children, they are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. Means they have to live their own life. Parents are our life, that is very true, but to live at the same place cannot be true forever. You have to go abroad and you have to fulfill your own dreams, because you have your own thoughts and your ideas. So with this, the chapter ends and it is all about his childhood.